Welcome to The Wide Angle. I'm Brendan Fallon. Top Gun Maverick is breaking box office records. Meanwhile, Canadian pilots deployed in Japan recently had a dose of some quasi-Top Gun action. On June 1st, Canadian aircrew had to quickly modify their flight paths to avoid collision with intercepting Chinese Communist Party or CCP military jets, said Canada's Department of National Defence. The Canadians were there as part of the international effort to back United Nations sanctions against North Korea. What they didn't count on was Chinese regime fighter jets playing chicken with them and then giving them the bird. Yes, Global News' sources said Chinese jets flew so close that Canadian pilots could make eye contact with them, with Chinese pilots sometimes raising their middle fingers. Now, this isn't the first recent CCP military provocation of the West. It wasn't that long ago Australia accused the Chinese Navy of pointing a military-grade laser at one of its military planes. And who can forget the surprise send-off Russian and Chinese warplanes gave Joe Biden as he wrapped up his Asia trip in May? Anyway, flipping the bird and playing chicken in the air is one thing, but the CCP's fighter pilots may want to be careful about biting off more than they can chew. Here's the reason. Canada's Air Force has seen its share of combat over recent decades. Iraq, Yugoslavia in the 90s, Afghanistan in the 2000s, whereas China's military, not so much. It's been around 40 years since the Chinese regime military has seen active combat. What's more, in 2017, the so-called People's Liberation Army, or PLA, let slip a range of bizarre reasons why its soldiers were failing fitness tests. Although this document doesn't seem to exist anymore, perhaps for reasons of national embarrassment. Allegedly, however, it reported 8% of men had, quote, enlarged veins in their scrotum. Too much sitting down and video game playing were both identified causes of this. In mid-2020, PLA soldiers reportedly came off second best when they ambushed Indian soldiers in Ladakh. Indian veterans alleged PLA troops attacked Indian soldiers with crude medieval-style weapons when the Indians were unarmed. Such barbarism must be condemned. This is thuggery, not soldiering, said a retired Indian Army colonel, who shared an image of the weapons used. In any event, the PLA allegedly had its ass kicked, losing twice as many soldiers as the Indian side. The PLA actually is not an army like nations have, commented one of India's retired top brass. They don't appreciate the way combat troops operate because the PLA is a political party's army. So flipping the bird to Canadians and staging scary exercises near Taiwan airspace is one thing, but the PLA would come off worse to wear in a real combat situation. And besides, Canadians have enough problems. They have Justin Trudeau for a Prime Minister. Today we look at how the CCP factors into the phenomenal success of Top Gun Maverick. Next, let's consider a battle of a different kind, one happening more on an economic front, but it's packed with no shortage of action. It's the censorship battle over Hollywood's big-budget films, with the Chinese regime appearing increasingly on the losing side. Top Gun Maverick and Doctor Strange 2 both present compelling illustrations of this. Apart from achieving major box office success, Doctor Strange 2 is also the focus of international controversy. We're going to take a look at why. But first, to see the full 20-minute plus version of this video, you can join epochtv, a streaming service committed to fact-based journalism and other quality. Here's the iconic scene where Doctor Strange takes on the octopus monster. In the background, you can just catch a glimpse of a newspaper box. As it turns out, that's one of ours. It's an Epoch Times box. And as you probably already guessed, the Epoch Times is one of the very few Chinese language media in North America not controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So an Epoch Times box in a Hollywood movie means almost certainly that that movie will be blocked by Beijing. And as expected, this film has been denied access to the Chinese market. What isn't so expected is that it would still generate such an enormous profit. Doctor Strange 2 has not only hit a home run at the US box office over 3 consecutive weeks, globally, its cumulative box office total is over 800 million US. It beats the previously released Batman, officially making Doctor Strange 2 the top-grossing film this year. This shows a movie that openly steps on the red line of the Chinese regime and disregards the Chinese market can still sell well and profit. Top Gun 2 Maverick was released on May 27th. Tom Cruise is back, eerily looking not all that different to what he did 36 years ago. Anyway, hormone replacement therapy, drinking unicorn tears, or whatever Tom's been doing, he is fast closing in on his F-18 jet on 60 years of age. So prior to the film's release, critics questioned how well it would do at the box office. Now, this film features its own very sensitive political taboo, setting it up to be blocked by the CCP. The flag of the Republic of China, aka Taiwan, appears on Tom's jacket. As you know, the CCP is trying to enact a David Copperfield-type illusion, convincing the world that Taiwan doesn't exist, or is actually a province of communist China. But why does the Taiwan flag appear in this film? As it happens, this isn't a new addition. Going back to 1986, the flags of Japan and Taiwan were on Tom's flight jacket. This connects to the character's backstory and the Navy cruiser his father served on, which sailed through Japan and Taiwan in the 60s. However, when the first trailer for Maverick was released in 2019, the flags on the back of the jacket had been replaced. Obscure geometric shapes had replaced the flags of Japan and Taiwan. This sparked widespread controversy and criticism at the time. Many said that Paramount Pictures was kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party and self-censoring. Later, an informant revealed that Chinese company Tencent Inc. had invested in the film. It requested the producer change the Japan and Taiwan flags. Tencent had concerns the film would not pass Communist China's film censors. But then the film was postponed due to the pandemic. In response, Tencent quickly pulled out as a shareholder, so the flags were back in place when Top Gun Maverick hit the cinemas. Personally, I was going to boycott this one, but now I may give it a look. This small change in detail has made Top Gun 2 even more of a hot topic on the world stage. What's more, in its first weekend, Top Gun 2 immediately surpassed 100 million at the North American box office. Worldwide, it made over 240 million in its first weekend. So we have here two sequels, Doctor Strange 2 and Top Gun Maverick, which have both antagonized the CCP and also both been instant hits, setting new box office records. So how has China become so seemingly inconsequential on the world movie market scene? Looking back, a number of films have been criticized for towing the Chinese regime line in order to tap the Chinese market. They self-censored and modified the plot and elements of their films. For example, the film World War Z, also known as Zombie World War, originally had the zombie virus coming from mainland China, but this was later recast as rabies from Taiwan. This was to make the Chinese Communist Party happy. For the same reason, the flags of Japan and Taiwan in Top Gun 2 were initially changed to placate the CCP. So what's changed? Did Hollywood suddenly acquire some measure of integrity, or does it all come back to the bottom line? Well, we'd like to think it's the former, and maybe some of these producers have grown some cojones, but by and large, it comes down to the almighty dollar. The CCP has shot itself in the foot, largely wiping out China's film market. This equals less Chinese communist money to be made for film producers, which means less Chinese communist influence over US films. Let me explain how this has gone down. To start with, the Chinese regime has forced its zero-COVID policy on the people. This has closed down whole cities and districts and hugely impacted the film entertainment industry. If we look at the stats, as of May 24th, there are over 8,000 movie theaters running across China, but they're disappearing at an average rate of 100 per day. There are now 4,300 fewer than there were before the pandemic outbreak. Of the existing cinemas, only 67% are allowed to open, but the actual attendance rate is miserably less than 5%. Suffice to say, there are probably more rabid dogs wandering into China's cinemas than people, and the dogs ain't coming from Taiwan. The Chinese film industry has lost its past glory. It's barely surviving under the iron fist of zeroing policy. So there's no need for Hollywood filmmakers to keep pleasing the CCP. They no longer have to self-censor for the CCP. Another factor in this is what you might call the fickle nature of the CCP. What I mean is that if you toe the line and play ball, the Chinese regime will likely still screw you over. To illustrate, Hollywood was willing to self-censor because they thought they would make money that way. But after not long, they realized such self-censorship not only failed to earn more money, but spurred the CCP on to censor even more. Even when producers are able to penetrate the Chinese market, the monetary gains may not be worth the cost. Let's look at Disney's live-action version of Mulan as an example. This one picked up 22 million at the box office in the first 3 days of its release. But there's a twist in this story. The character Mulan is all about filial piety, honor, sacrificing for one's country, all admirable traits. But now the actress who played Mulan, Liu Yifei, she was all about ranks of Chinese Communist police breaking the bones of Hong Kong protesters. Those people bravely trying to stop CCP thugs turning Hong Kong into an Orwellian surveillance state. Liu Yifei, aka Mulan, spoke out in support of the CCP. Well, you could say that she backed the wrong horse. This triggered strong discontent among overseas netizens and a campaign to boycott the movie Mulan overseas. Plus, adding fuel to the fire, they filmed Mulan in Xinjiang, and at the end of the film, the producers thanked the Xinjiang Authority. the same one enacting the persecution against the Uyghurs. This led to an international uproar and widespread boycott campaign. In the end, Mulan was aired just quietly in North America through online platforms, and box office revenues worldwide shrank significantly. The film that cost $200 million to produce actually only pulled in $66 million at the global box office. In this case, Disney's kowtowing to the CCP was big loss for small gain. This could explain why Disney recklessly let the Epoch Times newspaper box remain in Doctor Strange 2, a film which has proved highly profitable. Here's another reason the Chinese communist market isn't looking so attractive. Over recent years, the CCP has been pushing its war wolf diplomacy and mask diplomacy. It's made frequent statements attacking other countries. For example, it not so long ago identified Australia as a potential nuclear target. That's not to mention the repeated bullying of Taiwan and other countries. The CCP also boasted of its openness and transparency on dealing with the pandemic in China. This has triggered no small amount of resentment. Polling in the US suggests more than 80% of Americans have a negative view of China. This sentiment can't help but permeate America's cinema-going audience, people who are tired of producers bending to the carrot-and-stick rule of the CCP. So while filmmakers may still be willing to self-censor to get films into China, audiences are growing more disgusted by this situation. Growing disgust doesn't bode well for ticket sales. Reason 4 for why the Chinese movie-going market is drying up relates to many foreign companies uncoupling from China. This is caused by the CCP's drastic overreach. China keeps promising to open up its markets to foreigners, but in reality, it's done the opposite. Over recent years, it's imposed more and more regulations and restrictions on foreign companies and network enterprises. This has prompted many foreign companies to leave China. For example, LinkedIn announced closure of its Chinese website in October last year. This was followed by Yahoo's exit. Just recently, Airbnb, the world's leading bed and breakfast website, also said it's pulling out. This trend is spreading to the film industry, which the CCP also regulates with an iron fist. It imposes strict annual quotas restrictions on foreign films. It blocks politically sensitive content immediately. The same regulations and restrictions apply to the film industry, where the CCP not only imposes strict annual quota restrictions on foreign films, but also blocks any politically sensitive issues immediately. For example, Chinese director Chloe Zhao's Marvel blockbuster The Eternals cannot be seen in China. Zhao allegedly offended the Red Dragon when she was nominated for a Golden Globe. Western society is tired of the CCP's commercial sanctions, blocking freedom of expression and creativity overseas. So we're now seeing the US and Chinese film industries gradually going in opposite directions and gradually becoming uncoupled. The final reason involves Beijing's ideology of cutting out international society. Last year, the CCP launched an all-round supervision of education and training, online games, and other industries. It also started to restrict the English teaching curriculum in schools. Clearly, the idea is to cut off the language ability of young Chinese people to access Western culture. At the same time, Beijing is stepping up efforts to promote party education on Xi Jinping's thought. I imagine that wouldn't be a very long course. These measures aim to control people's minds. They constrain acceptance of foreign cultures and ideas. At the same time, they accelerate the indoctrination of the CCP ideology and spirit. In combination, they enact ideological lockdown. The CCP wants to zero out Western culture and free society values from people's heads. We've heard from Elliot Ackerman what a US versus Chinese regime conflict would look like. He's the author of 2034, A Novel of the Next World War. We've also looked at 2 Hollywood blockbusters, Top Gun, Maverick, and Doctor Strange 2 that didn't toe the Chinese regime line, and are doing pretty well all the same. I'm Brendan Fallon, and this is The Wide Angle.